Hello, welcome to Liberty Wolf, episode number 23. My name is Zach Strong, the creator of this podcast. If you are new, I encourage you to go back and listen to the older episodes. If you like them, why not subscribe to the channel? And more importantly, though, if you like them, share them with other people on your social media or wherever. I'm doing this to get a message out, to get information to people. So if you like what you hear, help me get that information out. Now, today's podcast will be a little bit different than the normal rambling I do. Today's will be a reading. Now, before you stop and go listen to something different, hopefully it won't be too boring. Right? It will be a rendering of Patrick Henry's famous "Give me liberty or give me death" speech. Now, it's not going to be a dramatization with music and crazy into it oratory, right? No, I'm not going to do that. That probably wouldn't come off so well. This is a one-man operation, right? However, it occurred to me as I was reading this speech recently that most people probably have not taken the time to read it. So I thought if I could make an audio version, and there probably already is one, but if I could make an audio version, perhaps I could get it out to a few more people who could listen to it and then hear it, whereas they would otherwise not ever, come across this information. But before I do that, I have a little context about Patrick Henry himself and about this speech to share, so you're not going into it totally blind. So Patrick Henry was one of the most famous of the American founding fathers. He was one of the most influential, definitely, in the early years. He, along with others such as John Hancock, Samuel Adams, John Adams, and others, really helped inspire Americans to revolt against Great Britain's tyranny. You could say almost that Patrick Henry was the voice of the American Revolution. He kind of captured the emotion and sentiment of the average American colonist at the time, the anger that they felt against the monarchical tyranny being rained down upon them by King George III and Parliament. Now, he really helped rile people up, too. Now, he was incredibly popular in his day for his oratory, and he used that oratory to tap into, again, that common emotion. Thomas Jefferson, who, as you know, was my historical hero, he was very influenced by Patrick Henry. When he was still a young student, he heard Patrick Henry speak, and he knew from that moment on, there was a fire that kind of kindled inside of him that he would be, instead of retiring to his home and farm as he had always planned, he would be in public service the rest of his life. And that turned out to be true. And that was thanks, in part at least, to Patrick Henry's inspirational speaking. Now, Jefferson gave a wonderful description of Patrick Henry's speaking abilities. He called it torrents of sublime eloquence. I think that's wonderful. Torrents of sublime eloquence. Now, he said also, in a different time, he actually wrote up a thing on Patrick Henry. He said that he was the laziest man in reading I ever knew. And he didn't particularly know the law, the technical aspects of the law incredibly well. But when it came to redressing grievances and speaking about what in the world was wrong, he said Patrick Henry was second to none. Like, he was in his element there, and he did a wonderful job. He said that he spoke like Homer wrote, and not Homer Simpson. If you don't know who Homer was, go look him up. Now, so with that kind of brief introduction, I want to launch into Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death by Patrick Henry, delivered on March 23rd, 1775. No man thinks more highly than I do of the patriotism as well as abilities of the very worthy gentlemen who have just addressed the House, but different men often see the same subject in different lights, and therefore I hope it will not be thought disrespectful to those gentlemen, if, entertaining as I do opinions of a character very opposite to theirs, I shall speak forth my sentiments freely and without reserve. This is no time for ceremony. The question before the House is one of awful moment to this country. For my own part, I consider it as nothing less than a question of freedom or slavery, and in proportion to the magnitude of the subject ought to be the freedom of the debate. It is only in this way that we can hope to arrive at truth, and fulfill the great responsibility which we hold to God and our country. Should I keep back my opinions at such a time, through fear of giving offense, I should consider myself as guilty of treason towards my country, and of an act of disloyalty toward the majesty of heaven, which I revere above all earthly kings. Mr. President, it is natural to man to indulge in the illusions of hope. We are apt to shut our eyes against a painful truth, and listen to the song of that siren till she transforms us into beasts. Is this the part of wise men engaged in a great and arduous struggle for liberty? Are we disposed to be of the number of those who, having eyes, see not, and having ears, hear not the things which so nearly concern their temporal salvation? For my part, whatever anguish of spirit it may cost, I am willing to know the whole truth, to know the worst, and to provide for it. I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that is the lamp of experience. I know of no way of judging of the future but by the past. And judging by the past, I wish to know what there has been in the conduct of the British ministry for the last 10 years to justify those hopes with which gentlemen have been pleased to solace themselves in the House. Is it that insidious smile with which our petition has been lately received? Trust it not, sir. It will prove a snare to your feet. Suffer not yourselves to be betrayed with a kiss. Ask yourselves how this gracious reception of our petition comports with those warlike preparations which cover our waters and darken our land. Are fleets and armies necessary to a work of love and reconciliation? Have we shown ourselves so unwilling to be reconciled that force must be called to win back our love? Let us not deceive ourselves, sir. These are the implements of war and subjugation, the last arguments to which kings resort. I ask gentlemen, sir, what means this martial array, if its purpose be not to force us to submission? Can gentlemen assign any other possible motive for it? Has Great Britain any enemy in this quarter of the world to call for this accumulation of navies and armies? No, sir, she has none. They are meant for us. They can be meant for no other. They are sent over to bind and rivet upon those chains which the British ministry have been so long forging. And what have we to oppose them? Shall we try argument, sir? Sir, we have been trying that for the last 10 years. Have we anything new to offer upon the subject? Nothing. We have held the subject up in every light of which it is capable, but it has been all in vain. Shall we resort to entreaty and humble supplication? What terms shall we find which have not been already exhausted? Let us not, I beseech you, sir, deceive ourselves. Sir, we have done everything that could be done to avert the storm which is now coming on. We have petitioned, we have remonstrated, we have supplicated, we have prostrated ourselves before the throne, and have implored its interposition to arrest the tyrannical hands of the ministry and parliament. Our petitions have been slighted, our remonstrances have produced additional violence and insult, our supplications have been disregarded, and we have been spurned with contempt from the foot of the throne. In vain, after these things, may we indulge the fond hope of peace and reconciliation. There is no longer any room for hope. If we wish to be free, if we mean to preserve inviolate those inestimable privileges for which we have been so long contending, if we mean not basely to abandon the noble struggle in which we have been so long engaged, in which we have pledged ourselves never to abandon until the glorious object of our contest shall be obtained, we must fight. I repeat it, sir, we must fight. And appeal to arms and to the God of hosts is all that is left us. They tell us, sir, that we are weak, unable to cope with so formidable an adversary. But when shall we be stronger? Will it be the next week, or the next year? Will it be when we are totally disarmed, and when a British guard shall be stationed in every house? Shall we gather strength by irresolution and inaction? Shall we acquire the means of effectual resistance by lying supinely on our backs and hugging the delusive phantom of hope until our enemies shall have bound us hand and foot? Sir, we are not weak if we make a proper use of those means which the God of nature hath placed in our power. The millions of people, armed in the holy cause of liberty, and in such a country as that which we possess, are invincible by any force which our enemy can send against us. Besides, sir, we shall not fight our battles alone. There is a just God who presides over the destinies of nations, and who will raise up friends to fight our battles for us. The battle, sir, is not to the strong alone. It is to the vigilant, the active, the brave. Besides, sir, we have no election. If we were base enough to desire it, It is now too late to retire from the contest. There is no retreat but in submission and slavery. Our chains are forged. Their clanking may be heard on the plains of Boston. The war is inevitable, and let it come. I repeat it, sir, let it come. It is vain, sir, to extenuate the matter. Gentlemen may cry, peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war is actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. And that is the famous speech by Patrick Henry. Now, if you notice the date, March 23rd, 1775, that is less than 1 month before the shot heard round the world. That is, the battles at Lexington and Concord. If you know the history of those battles, the British in Boston, they had information that the rebels, as they called us, as they called the patriots, who wanted their liberty, had been storing ammunition and guns in Concord. And there was also information that Samuel Adams and Patrick Henry were hiding out in the area. So, under cover of night, they sent about 700 British troops on a march to go arrive by morning time and confiscate our guns, our ammunition, and destroy them. Now, a lot of people don't realize that the government's attempt to confiscate firearms from the American colonists was what sparked the American Revolution. I mean, there were a lot of other things. There was already, there was already clashes back and forth, especially war of words that probably made the situation irreparable. And as Patrick Henry said, the next news we get will be about a war, the clash of resounding arms, he said. And well, he was prophetic, because less than 1 month later, here came the British troops. Then you had Captain John Parker and others who stood their ground when these British redcoats came to disarm them. And they became the first casualties of the American Revolution. And the British came into Concord, and they did confiscate and destroy some of the firearms and ammunition. Others, they were not so successful at finding or destroying, but they did destroy some. And as retribution, the local militiamen, they gathered in from all sides and harassed them and shot them all the way back to Boston, killing a good number of British. It was a wake-up call to the British that, hey, these rebels, they really are going to fight back. They're not going to tamely lay down and let us disarm them. And so this issue is what really spurred on the American Revolution. And again, the soundtrack of the American Revolution could be in Patrick Henry's voice. Give me liberty or give me death might as well have been the motto of all the American colonies at the time, because they decided 1 year later, in the Declaration of Independence, to say, give us liberty or give us death. And these founding fathers, they would have been put to death. They would have been labeled traitors and killed in a horrible, gruesome manner if we would have lost the war. But we didn't. We won. As Patrick Henry said, God was on our side. And millions of people in the holy cause of liberty, and if they're righteous people, I add, have God's help and will be blessed. And so I don't want to go on much further today other than to say I really recommend you sharing this speech, whether in my format here in audio, as with all its imperfections and stumbling, or in written text format from numerous sources you can find online. I recommend sharing that on your social media, Facebook, in emails, in groups. Print it out, share it with your children. People need to remember these sentiments. They need to remember what our founding fathers talked about, the arguments they used. And we need to begin using the same sort of language because we have a government that's far more corrupt, far more tyrannical, far more involved in a detrimental way in our daily life today than the founding fathers ever had under King George, the British tyrannical king. It's worse today. Our founding fathers didn't put up with it then, and they sure as heck would not put up with it now. Patrick Henry would have been, his torrents of sublime eloquence would have been far more heated, let's say, if he was speaking today in 2020. So I encourage you to gather up that same spirit that Patrick Henry conveyed in his words, his very eloquent words, and to make the similar declaration in your own life: give me liberty or give me death. Because it's better to die than to live like a slave. Better dead than red. So I end, as is customary, by saying, Sic semper tyrannis, long live liberty.